Get out of here! You don't belong in this courthouse! The officer's voice boomed as he shoved her papers back into her hands. His tone wasn't just firm. It was venom, laced with the kind of certainty only arrogance gives. She steadied herself, but the impact stung, not just physically, but in the weight of his words. She had come prepared. Her documents were pristine, her credentials flawless. Yet, in his eyes, none of that mattered. "Sir, I have every right to be here," she said evenly. Her voice was calm, but the tremor beneath revealed the storm she was holding back. He sneered. "Every right? Not you. Not today." His words cracked across the lobby like a whip, drawing glances from every corner. Papers rustled. Shoes scuffed the marble floor. This wasn't just a rejection. It was dismissal, an erasure of her worth. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't about rules. It was about race. She tightened her grip on the papers he'd thrown back at her, refusing to step aside. The space between them bristled with tension, thick enough to choke the air. The crowd began to stir, sensing something ugly unfolding. Some whispered. Others simply stared, but no one stepped forward. The officer squared his shoulders, lips curling into a taunt. "I said move. People like you waste everyone's time." And as silence swallowed the room, the real fight was only beginning. He threw his head back and laughed. Not the kind of laugh that fills a room with joy, but the cruel kind, sharp and mocking. "Look at this," he said, pointing at her like a spectacle. "Pretending she belongs." The sound echoed through the high ceiling, bouncing off the cold walls. And some in the crowd chuckled along, nervous, complicit, unwilling to stand apart. She held her ground, her jaw tight. The humiliation burned, but she would not give him the satisfaction of reaction. A man near the back muttered, "It's just procedure." Another lifted his phone, recording as if her pain was entertainment. "Assistant? Maybe a secretary, no?" The officer tilted his head, smirk widening. "Janitor, then. That's more fitting, don't you think?" His words sliced like glass, drawing blood without a knife. Her silence was a shield, but the laughter behind it was relentless. Some faces in the crowd flickered with discomfort. Eyes darted away, lips pressed shut. Yet not one voice rose to stop it. She exhaled slowly, refusing to crumble. His laughter filled the space, but underneath it another sound was growing, the faint, uneasy whisper of conscience. And deep down, everyone knew this wasn't over. The whispers spread like smoke. She shouldn't fight it. Why's he pushing her? Maybe she really doesn't belong. Every sentence is cut differently. Some carried doubt, others quiet defense, but most were soaked in apathy. A few onlookers smirked, arms crossed, entertained by the spectacle. Others shifted uncomfortably, their weight moving from one foot to the other as guilt gnawed silently. Someone raised a phone higher, capturing not just the officer's smirk, but her stillness, her refusal to bow. She heard them all. Every murmur, every judgment. It wasn't just his voice against her anymore. It was the crowd's silence, their complicity. But in the stillness of her face, there was a quiet answer. She wouldn't give them the collapse they were waiting for. The officer grinned, feeding on the whispers like fuel. "See," he said almost proudly, "no one here thinks you belong." But he was wrong. Because though most stayed silent, a few faces in that crowd told a different story. Faces that were uneasy, restless, the kind of unease that could spark something dangerous. The tension swelled, pressing against the walls, daring someone, anyone, to break it. She stood rooted in place, her silence speaking louder than the taunts hurled at her. The officer leaned closer, his breath hot with disdain. "Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you know I'm right." Her eyes didn't waver. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. Her papers rested firmly in her hands, as if they were proof not just of her right to be there, but of something much bigger, her dignity. Every second she stayed silent, the humiliation should have deepened. But instead it shifted. The tension bent, tilting the weight of the moment. Her refusal to break unnerved him. The crowd felt it too. The air seemed thicker, heavier. Her silence was not weakness, it was defiance. Still, he pressed harder. "You think you can stand here among real cases, real judges, real people?" His voice cracked with false confidence, too loud, too desperate. and yet she said nothing. Her silence was a mirror, and in it he saw himself unraveling. The officer's patience snapped. His words, sharp and venomous, cut through the lobby. "People like you don't stand here. Not in this courthouse. Not in this lifetime." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cruelty was no longer subtle. It was open, undeniable. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from fury. Yet still, she didn't lash out. "You'll never stand where real judges walk," he spat, stepping closer. "You'll never sit where real power sits." The words were meant to crush her, to bury her beneath the weight of history and prejudice. But instead, they hung in the air like smoke, ugly, undeniable, and revealing far more about him than her. A hush fell over the room. For the first time, some eyes that had looked away now stayed locked on her, waiting, watching. Her silence wasn't enough anymore. Something was building, rising from deep within her, and though no one knew it yet, the tide was about to turn. She inhaled slowly, drawing breath as if it carried centuries of resilience. Her eyes lifted, steady, unbroken. They glinted, not with submission, but with something stronger. Something the officer couldn't name, and the crowd couldn't ignore. For a heartbeat, no words were spoken. Only her gaze, and in that gaze a promise lived. "This is far from over. Are you still here?" The janitor's voice echoed down the empty hall. She didn't look up. Her pen scratched against paper, pages filled with notes, underlined passages, highlighted arguments. Midnight bled into the morning, but she refused to leave. "They think I can't," she whispered to herself, "so I will." While others slept comfortably in their dorms, she sat alone in that silent library. The light above her desk flickered, but her focus never wavered. Every book she opened was a weapon. Every line she memorized was armor. For her, this wasn't just studying. It was survival. The world outside doubted her. Professors with raised brows, classmates who pretended she didn't belong. Each moment in that chair was her quiet rebellion against a system built to exclude her. She knew no one would hand her success. She'd have to carve it out, one sleepless night at a time. But even as her eyes burned and her hands ached, she kept turning pages, whispering into the darkness. "One day, they won't be able to ignore me." But little did she know, the whispers waiting outside those library walls would cut deeper than exhaustion ever could. Quote a kid. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They slid like knives in the middle of a crowded hallway. "She's lucky to be here. She probably got in because of diversity points." They never said it to her face, not directly. Instead, they let it slip just loud enough for her to hear as she passed. Each comment chipped away, but never broke her. She would smile, though her jaw tightened. She'd sit in classrooms where professors praised others for answers she'd already given. She'd raise her hand only to be overlooked, but every insult became fuel. Every doubt became a reason to sharpen her mind further. They thought they were cutting her down, but they were only sharpening her edge. Still, no matter how strong she stood, she couldn't silence the truth. Those whispers weren't just about her. They were about every student who looked like her, and that weight was heavier than they could ever imagine. At night, she closed her eyes and saw more than exams and degrees. She saw courtrooms. She saw her name etched into cases that would outlive her. "What if I change it?" she thought. "What if I bend the very walls that tried to keep me out?" The world wanted her to shrink, to be grateful for scraps, to stay in the margins. But her vision refused to stay small. Every rejection, every side glance, every quiet dismissal, it all fed into the fire that burned brighter with each passing day. She didn't just dream of being part of the system. She dreamed of rewriting it, of walking into spaces where no one thought she belonged and making her presence undeniable. It wasn't arrogance. It was necessity. Because if she didn't push forward, who would? And if she didn't fight for her place, how many others would be told not to even try? Her dreams weren't just against the current. They were against centuries of resistance. But with each passing day, she began to believe maybe she was strong enough to fight the tide. And yet what drove her wasn't just ambition. It was something far more dangerous to those who doubted her. It hit her one night when she closed her books and caught her own reflection in the library window. She realized this wasn't only about her. She was carrying voices that had been silenced, dreams that had been dismissed, generations that had been told, "You don't belong here." Every insult she endured, every doubt she crushed, wasn't just proof of her resilience. It was a message for those who would come after her, that someone had already broken through the first cracks in the wall. She wasn't studying to win a seat. She was preparing to open doors, doors that had been bolted shut for too long. And as she whispered into that empty night, "I won't be the last," she knew the real fight hadn't even started yet, because the world wasn't ready for the storm she was becoming. "Show me that ID again." His voice was calm this time, even polite on the surface. But the weight behind it was heavy, the kind that says you're already guilty of something. She blinked, confused. "You just looked at it." He tilted his head, smirking faintly. "Yeah, but just making sure it's real. These things can be tricky." Around them, others filed past with nothing more than a glance. No second looks, no delays. But her papers scrutinized. Her face studied as though it didn't fit. Her fingers tightened on the ID. She felt the eyes of strangers pressing into her back. Some were sympathetic, others entertained. He held the card longer than necessary, inspecting it as though searching for flaws that weren't there. Finally, he handed it back, but not without one last sting. "You understand, right? We've got to be extra careful with certain people." Her jaw locked, words caught between anger and restraint. The crowd shuffled impatiently, but he didn't move aside. Not yet. This wasn't about the ID. This was about reminding her she didn't belong. And though she forced her hands to stay steady, inside she already knew. This was only the beginning. "Actually," he dragged out the word, blocking her path again. "There's a special rule. You'll need an additional clearance slip." "Did anyone give you one?" She frowned. "Clearance slip?" "There is no clearance slip." He shrugged casually, as if inventing it on the spot was standard procedure. "Well, you'll need one. Maybe step aside until you can sort it out." People brushed past, unchecked. A man in a suit breezed through without even opening his wallet. A woman carried a coffee, no questions asked. Yet here she stood, stalled by rules that had never existed until this moment. Her voice cracked with both defiance and disbelief. "Why are you making this harder for me?" He leaned closer, lowering his tone just enough to make it sting sharper. "Relax, it's nothing personal," but it was. Everyone in earshot knew it. The special rules weren't written on any paper, they were written on her skin. And though she stood tall, every second of delay carved humiliation deeper into her chest. He finally sighed, as if indulging her persistence was a favor. "Look," he said with mock patience, "even if you got in, what's the point? Don't waste the judge's time." The words sliced deeper than any shout could. Spoken softly, laced with condescension, they rang louder than insults. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He smiled faintly, satisfied at her silence, as if he'd proven something. Around them, the crowd shifted, some averting their eyes, others whispering behind their hands. He leaned back, arms crossed. "Courts for people who matter. You sure you're in the right place?" Every syllable dripped with dismissal, reducing her to nothing more than an inconvenience. Yet behind her stillness, something stirred, a fire, sharp and quiet, refusing to be smothered. But before she could answer, he moved again, reminding her she wasn't the only one he judged differently. "Morning, sir?" His tone flipped in an instant. He waved a white man forward with a broad grin, barely glancing at the ID shoved his way. The man passed through effortlessly. Then, his hand shot back out, blocking her chest once more. "Not you. Step aside." The shift was so blatant, even the crowd reacted. A hush spread, followed by whispers sharp enough to cut. "Why's he stopping her again? She already showed him everything. Is it because—" But no one stepped forward. No one challenged him. She stood frozen at the threshold, the door open for some, yet slammed on her again and again. His smirk widened, feeding on the silence of the bystanders. Her heart pounded. Her fists clenched. But she said nothing. Yet. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't the worst of it. The worst was still coming. Look at her! The officer suddenly burst out, his voice echoing loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. Pretending she belongs here. Laughter cracked from his throat, sharp and mocking, as if her presence was a comedy show. He didn't whisper it, didn't hide it. He wanted the crowd to hear. She really thinks she's somebody, he continued, holding her papers high like a prop. Walking in here like she owns the place. The words were poison. They weren't just aimed at her. They were meant to infect everyone listening, turning strangers into accomplices to her humiliation. She stood frozen. Heat crawled up her neck, her heart pounding against her ribs. But she refused to step back. The officer paced in front of her, smiling as though he were the gatekeeper of worthiness. What's next? You'll tell us you're here for the bench? That you belong where real judges sit? The crowd chuckled nervously. Some smirked, others looked away. She saw it in their faces, the disbelief, the doubt, the quiet approval of her humiliation. Every second was an attempt to break her spirit in public, to strip away her dignity with laughter. But as his voice grew louder, so did the silence inside her. A silence that wasn't weakness, only waiting, because this wasn't the end of his cruelty. It was only the start. Get this on camera, someone muttered. And just like that, phones appeared, glowing screens raised high, catching every ounce of her embarrassment. Some zoomed in, eager to capture a scandal. Others turned away, pretending not to notice, their silence as cutting as the officer's mockery. She could feel the recording eyes more than the watching ones. Every angle a reminder that her pain was entertainment for strangers. The officer leaned against the doorframe with smug ease. Go ahead, record it. Show the world how rules work when people try to sneak their way in. No one corrected him. No one spoke the truth. Their cowardice filled the room heavier than his insults. She searched the crowd, dozens of faces. Not one willing to meet hers with courage. And for a flicker, she wondered if maybe that's how injustice survives, not just through the cruelty of one, but through the silence of many. Yet even in silence, something was shifting. A crack in the crowd's stillness was about to appear. From the back, almost drowned by whispers, came a trembling voice. Let her through. It was soft, almost apologetic, but it hung in the air long enough to cut through the tension. The officer froze. Then, slowly, his lips curled into a grin. Let her through? He repeated the words like a joke. That's cute. He turned toward the sound, eyes scanning the crowd until he spotted the speaker, a young man, barely old enough to be out of school, his hands shaking as he clutched his phone. Why don't you come say that up here? The officer taunted. Or is your courage only good from the back row? The young man's lips pressed shut. His courage wilted under the weight of the officer's stare. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. No one else spoke. No one dared. The officer chuckled darkly. Didn't think so. He turned back to her, more emboldened than before. Now where were we? Oh, right, reminding you of your place. And this time his cruelty had no filter. He stepped closer, invading her space, lowering his voice so every syllable carried venom. Listen carefully, he said, his smirk hardening into something colder. Not in my courthouse. People like you, he jabbed a finger toward her chest, don't get to stand where real judges belong. The words hit like steel bars slamming shut. Gasps slipped from a few in the crowd, but no one challenged him. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, her pulse unsteady. The officer, seeing her silence, mistook it for defeat. He straightened up, his voice rising louder for the crowd to hear. So let's stop pretending. This place isn't for you. It never was. And it never will be. For the first time, the laughter from earlier turned into uneasy murmurs. Even those who had smirked before shifted uncomfortably. The ugliness of his words was undeniable now, but he didn't care. He basked in the power of humiliation, convinced he had broken her in front of everyone. And then her hands began to tremble. Her fingers curled tightly around her papers, shaking just enough for the officer to notice. He smirked, satisfied. But then she lifted her chin. Her voice, though calm, cut sharper than his mockery. Are you sure about that? The crowd fell still. The question hung heavy in the air, not just aimed at him, but at everyone watching, recording, and staying silent. Her voice did not waver. Even as her body betrayed the strain, her words carried the weight of defiance. For the first time, the officer faltered. Just for a breath, his arrogance cracked, and in that sliver of silence she prepared her next move. Her foot moved forward. One step, measured, deliberate. Her eyes burned, no longer pleading for fairness, but carrying something deeper. Something stronger, humiliated, yes, wounded, yes, but not broken. Never broken, and with that single step, she carried a truth the officer and every bystander couldn't yet see. What happened next would change everything. "Judge Jackson?" The name cracked through the chaos like a lightning strike. A senior clerk, breathless and pale, rushed forward from the inner hallway, clutching a folder. His voice wavered with urgency, but it carried enough weight to silence the crowd. For a beat, no one moved. Then whispers rippled through the room, confused, startled, disbelieving. "Judge Jackson?" All at once, the mocking laughter turned brittle. The officer blinked, his jaw tightening, but the truth hung there, undeniable. The clerk's eyes darted nervously toward her. "Your chambers are ready, ma'am," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. His tone wasn't casual respect, it was reverence. Gasps tore through the onlookers. Phones dropped lower, recording less confidently now. Every eye swung from the officer's smirk to her steady stance. The humiliation he had built with such pride crumbled in an instant, replaced with a stunned, heavy silence, and yet this was only the beginning of his downfall. The officer's grin faltered. For the first time, his confidence betrayed him. "Wait, Judge," he stammered, the word foreign in his mouth. The same crowd that had laughed with him now shifted away, unwilling to be attached to his cruelty. The smirks vanished, replaced by uneasy stares. Panic flickered across his face as the reality of his mistake sank in. Every word he had spat now boomeranged back with brutal force. His laughter, once sharp and commanding, was gone. In its place was a suffocating silence that burned hotter than shame. But the worst moment was yet to come, because she wasn't done. Her voice cut through the quiet like steel, calm, precise, deadly. "You said I don't belong." The officer swallowed hard. No excuse left his lips. No arrogance remained to cover him. She took a step closer, holding his gaze with unshaken authority. "In front of all these witnesses, you told me I would never stand where real judges belong." Each word was measured, echoing with the power of truth. "And yet here I am," the crowd bristled. Phones rose again, this time not to humiliate her, but to capture the reckoning. Her voice grew stronger. "Discrimination wears many faces. Today, it wore yours, loud, proud. I'm certain it will win." She paused, letting the silence stretch, daring him to respond, but he couldn't. His lips parted. But no sound came. She leaned in just enough for her words to strike him alone. "Remember this moment, because it belongs to me, not you." The balance of power had shifted, and everyone felt it. Not another word was needed. She turned, stepping past him with deliberate calm. Each stride was heavy with dignity, a reminder that no insult could cage her. The courthouse, moments earlier alive with cruel laughter, was now a graveyard of silence. No one dared breathe too loud as she passed. The officer stood frozen, the weight of his mistake pressing harder with every step she took toward the bench that was rightfully hers. And in that silence, one truth settled deep in every witness's chest. Power had changed hands. But what would happen when she finally sat in that chair? "All rise!" The words thundered through the courtroom, heavier than they had ever sounded before. Every seat creaked, every whisper died as she stepped forward, not as the woman mocked the door, but as Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. The silence that followed was not just respect, it was awe. She lowered herself into the high-backed chair, her rightful seat of justice, and for the first time, the balance of power was visible. No officer, no arrogance, No barrier could deny her presence now. Her robe fell neatly around her shoulders as the gavel rested within reach. She looked out at the same crowd that had laughed, doubted, and scorned her. Now no one dared meet her eyes directly, because authority was hers and hers alone. For the officer, the game was over. For the courthouse, a lesson had just begun. And still the air held the weight of something unspoken, something that would make the walls remember this day forever. His face was drained of all color. The swagger that had carried him moments before was gone, replaced by trembling silence. "Escort him out," the clerk ordered. 2 deputies moved swiftly, each gripping an arm as the officer tried to stammer excuses no one wanted to hear. His boots dragged against the polished floor, the scrape echoing like the sound of his downfall. The same crowd that once fed his arrogance now turned away, unwilling to claim him. His authority had evaporated, stripped clean in front of everyone. But justice wasn't done yet. Those who had laughed now shifted uncomfortably. Eyes dropped to the floor, guilt heavy in their chests. The bystanders who had stood frozen in silence suddenly wished they had spoken up. One woman near the back began clapping softly. The sound was hesitant, almost fragile. Then another joined. And another. Soon the chamber filled with applause, not thunderous but steady, carrying the rhythm of respect. It was no longer for the robe she wore. It was for the strength she carried long before the robe touched her shoulders. And yet, the final word had not been spoken. She raised her hand and the room hushed instantly. Her voice, calm yet unshakable, rolled through the chamber. Justice is not a privilege. It is not reserved for the comfortable or the powerful. It belongs to all of us, or it belongs to none of us. The words cut deep, leaving no heart untouched. Some bowed their heads. Some blinked back tears. But no one could deny the truth. She leaned forward, her gaze sweeping the room. Never forget, silence feeds injustice. But courage? Courage changes everything. And though her voice fell quiet, the echoes refused to die. Because everyone there knew the story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. What would you have done? The question doesn't fade, it lingers, sharp and uncomfortable. If you had stood in that courthouse watching her mocked, would you have spoken? Or would you have stared at the floor hoping someone else would step in? Silence feels safe. Silence feels neutral. But in moments like that, silence becomes a weapon. Think about it. When the officer laughed, when the crowd whispered, when she stood alone. Where would your voice have been? It's easy to say, I would have spoken up. But the truth is, most didn't. They chose comfort over courage. And now the question presses on you. Would you have done the same? Silence has never protected the oppressed. It has always protected the oppressor. Every time someone looks away, injustice grows bolder. Every time someone stays quiet, racism finds new ground to spread. History isn't only written by those in power, it's written by those who stood by and said nothing. And in that silence, dignity is stolen, opportunities are crushed, and lives are scarred. The cost of complicity is too high, and it always falls on the ones who have already carried enough. If her story shook you, don't let it end here. Share it. Let it echo beyond this screen. Because silence fed the humiliation, but your voice can stop the cycle. Be the one who speaks. Be the one who refuses to stay quiet. And remember, what you do next is part of the story, too.